This day in sports history. It's March 15th, and on this day in 1963, it was the game of change. Back on the 12th, I talked about a secret basketball game that was played in 1944 between white Duke students and black North Carolina college students. And it was a game that would have been forbidden and illegal if university authorities or police had found out about it. Now here we are nearly 20 years later, and Jim Crow laws are still being enforced in the Deep South. The Mississippi State basketball team was one of the best in the South, but not many outside of the SEC knew about them. In the 1959, 61, and 62 seasons, the Bulldogs had been the SEC champs, but had not been allowed to go to the NCAA Tournament because doing so would mean the all-white Mississippi State team would play against integrated teams in the North. In 1963, Mississippi State once again won the SEC, and the team wanted a chance to prove that they could play against teams outside the South in the postseason, play the best of the best. One of the players on that team, Bailey Howell, remembers all too well.
We not only were the best team in the SEC, we were the best team in all of the South.
They'd been invited to play, assigned to East Lansing, and given a first-round bye. University President Dean Colvert wanted to shake up the old ways of Mississippi. He saw what was happening around the country, and the year before, Ole Miss had integrated with James Meredith enrolling in Oxford as the first black student there. It had not happened at Mississippi State yet, but he knew it was coming. Why not let athletics lead the way and let his boys play in the tournament? Well, word began to seep out of Starkville to the capital that the Bulldogs were considering making the trip. Governor Ross Barnett was vehemently opposed to the idea and meant to impose Jim Crow laws to prevent them from traveling. Injunctions were filed. Subpoenas were drawn up. The Bulldogs had to sneak out of town. Aubrey Nichols, one of those players traveling to play, remembers that day clearly.
Law enforcement was trying to find us so that they could serve the subpoenas on us. There was a group, 4, 5, 6 of us, that went one direction. There was another group that went another direction and came later. If one group got served, then he had another group that was ready to go.
The team made it to East Lansing, and they were slated to play Loyola Chicago, a team with 4 black starting players. Mississippi State had never seen the Ramblers play and did not know much about them. As the teams got ready for the tip, Mississippi State's Jodan Gold met Loyola's Jerry Hartness in the center jump circle, and he stuck his hand out to shake. Hartness extended his hand as well, and the interracial handshake was captured by cameras all over the arena. The implication of that handshake was not lost on anybody. Gold and Hartness reflected on that moment decades later.
I'm just going out to shake hands to start a ball game, something I've done a lot of times, and just seemed like it just totally lit up. I didn't know how many people had taken pictures of it. I didn't realize just shaking a hand would get this much excitement. And then it started to come to me that this was history. This was more than a game.
As for the game, the Bulldogs started on a high note, but the Ramblers got their offense going and controlled the rest of the game. Loyola Chicago went on to win 61-51 and would eventually win the national championship that year. This game came to be called the Game of Change, and it moved not only Mississippi State, but other schools in the South to integrate their campuses. Now, it's not solely responsible for that, but it was one piece of that key that helped unlock segregation in the Deep South. University President Colvert said that when they finally enrolled their first black student in 1965, it was a non-event on campus, and he credits what the basketball team did on this day as a step in making that happen. Hey, real quick, you've heard me talk a lot about the Sterling Soap Company over the past few months, and if you haven't tried out their soaps, I get it. It's not easy changing up your routine. But let me just say, if you give them a try, I'm nearly 100% certain you will have zero regrets. They carry not only bar soap, but shave soap, liquid body soap, body lotions, beard balm, lip balm, and a lot more. Plus, there are myriad scents to choose from. Their products are made with natural ingredients and scented oils, and they are committed to being environmentally conscious. And I always get a handwritten note on my packing slip, so I know it's been checked before shipping, and it's a nice little human touch in a world that seems to be going away from that. Give Sterling Soap a try today at sterlingsoap.com. On this day in 1989, 2 days before his Michigan Wolverines were going to tip off in the NCAA Tournament, Bill Frieder was fired as the head coach. Frieder had every intention of coaching his Wolverines in the NCAA Tournament. The problem was he'd already accepted an offer from Arizona State to coach its basketball team the following season. Frieder tried to keep everything under wraps. This wouldn't have been the first time a coach had secretly agreed to a deal with another team before his time with his current one was done, but word of the agreement leaked. And when confronted by his athletics director and former football coach Bo Schembechler, if it was true, Frieder fessed up and admitted that he was going to trade the cold Ann Arbor winters for the warmer climate of Tempe. Frieder, who held 2 degrees from Michigan and put together a dynamite roster of talent to contend for the national championship, was abruptly fired with the no-nonsense Schembechler shouting, "A Michigan man will coach Michigan." Frieder's team had started the year in the top 5, but after several losses, finished the regular season as the 10th best team in the country, according to the AP poll. Schembechler immediately handed the reins of the club to Steve Fisher and named him the interim head coach. It's not like this club was devoid of talent. There were 6 future NBA players on this roster, but nobody was really giving this team much of a chance to do much as a 3 seed. And yet, Steve Fisher got this team to play for him, and 19 days later, behind the play of Glenn Rice and clutch free throw shooting from Ramil Robinson, they were national champions. On this day in 1997, Dean Smith became the all-time winningest Division I basketball coach. His North Carolina Tar Heels were in a second-round NCAA tournament matchup with the Colorado Buffaloes, and only playing about 90 minutes from home at Winston-Salem's Joel Memorial Coliseum. Smith had amassed 876 wins as a college basketball head coach, all at the University of North Carolina, and he was tied with former Kentucky head coach Adolph Rupp. There was a definite contrast between these two men. Smith pushed for integration in the 1960s, recruiting Charlie Scott as the first black athlete to play for him, while Rupp resisted until the 1970s. On this night, Smith's Tar Heels were number 4 in the country, but the 24th-ranked Colorado Buffaloes played loose in the first half, closed out the half with an 8-point run, and held a 1-point lead at the break, making people wonder if they were going to have to wait until the following year to see the record broken. But the Tar Heels used a 17-4 run in the second half to break free of the Buffaloes, and then the celebrations were underway. North Carolina won 73-56 to advance to the Sweet 16, but more importantly, Dean Smith had won number 877, becoming the all-time winningest Division I college basketball coach. North Carolina would win 2 more before losing to Arizona in the Final Four. Surprisingly, Coach Smith retired 6 months later, saying he just didn't have the same enthusiasm he once did. Coach Smith is now 15th on the all-time list. On this day in 1969, it was a rough day for the U.S. hockey team. So, 69, not an Olympic year, but this was the World Championships, and this was the U.S. versus the Soviets. This was the opening game of pool play, and this game could not have been more of a mismatch. The Soviets had won the previous 6 World Championships, and the U.S. team was made up of a bunch of amateurs who barely knew each other, let alone played with each other much. And it was like a shooting gallery in the first 2 periods for American goalie Mike Curran. And unfortunately for him, he was the pigeon or the duck or whatever else you shoot at a shooting gallery. Curran did what he could in the first period. He faced 22 shots and stopped 19 of them. But in the second, things got worse. The Russian assault on the U.S. goal was relentless, and Curran was nearly helpless trying to stop them. The Soviets scored 11 second-period goals to take a 14-0 lead into the final period. Curran was pulled after the second and replaced by John Lothrop. By that point, the Soviets wanted the game to end and took it easy on the second stringer, only scoring 3 more times. The final was 17-0, the most lopsided defeat for the U.S. in the Worlds. The American goalies faced a total of 66 shots in the barrage, and the thing is, it did not get any better for the Americans. They lost all 10 of their games in the World Championships in '69 and had a goal differential of -51. On this day in 1978, the Oakland Athletics traded left-handed pitcher Vida Blue to the San Francisco Giants for 7 players and $300,000. Now, this seems a little top-heavy, but this trade actually benefited San Francisco. The move by the A's was really more of a salary dump and an attempt to rebuild a team that had success in the early 70s when Oakland won back-to-back-to-back World Series from 72 to 74. Blue had been the American League MVP and Cy Young Award winner in 71. But by 77, the A's had fallen off. They finished 7th in the AL West and had one of the worst attendance figures in the league. Blue won 14 and lost 19 with 157 strikeouts in 77, but he still had some value, even though Charlie Finley nearly gave him away for bupkis to the Cincinnati Reds for a first base prospect and around $1.75 million in cash, until Commissioner Bowie Kuhn stepped in and vetoed the deal under a clause known as "in the best interest of baseball," thinking that the trade would give the Reds an unfair advantage in the National League. So, instead, Blue was traded across the bay for these guys: Gary Alexander, Gary Thomason, Dave Heverlow, Alan Worth, John Henry Johnson, Phil Huffman, and the player to be named later became Mario Guerrero. Most of those guys didn't spend more than a year in Oakland, and they weren't that productive. Reliever Dave Heverlow may have been the closest thing to a prize in the deal. His best year was 78 when he had 10 saves, but he was really known more for shaving his head than his actual pitching. Blue pitched 4 years in his first stint with San Francisco. His best season was also 78 when he had 18 wins and a 2.79 ERA, and he followed that up with a pair of 14-win seasons. Hey, I needed to call a quick timeout to let you know that we're giving away a $50 gift card to Home Field Apparel. Have a favorite college sports team? Of course you do. You're listening to a sports podcast. Well, Home Field Apparel has all the great gear so you can support your team in style. Jerseys, hoodies, hats, and a whole lot more are available in your team's colors and insignias. So go to sportshistorynetwork.com/giveaways for your chance at a $50 gift card to Home Field Apparel. I've also put a link in the show notes. Now, let's get back out there. We've got more of this episode to do. On this day in 1869, the Cincinnati Red Stockings became the first professional baseball team. Sort of. And I say sort of because there is a bit of mythos surrounding this particular team. Were they a professional team? Yes. Cincinnati businessman Aaron Chapman was a proponent of having salaried players. He brought in a cricket player named Harry Wright to be player manager, and in essence the general manager, finding players to play for the Red Stockings. He was paid around $10,000 to organize the team, to get the players, and manage, and an additional $1,200 to play. Now, were they the first professional baseball team? There is debate here. There were paid players and fully paid rosters prior to 1869. They just weren't talked about. The Brooklyn Athletics predated the Red Stockings with paid players by a year or two. The amateur versus professional debate was raging with the majority of public sentiment on the side of amateur at this point, And that debate would go on through the first quarter of the 20th century. The thing that made the 1869 Cincinnati Red Stockings stand out and become known as the first professional baseball team was they were fully open about having a roster of fully paid players, and they went all around the country to play. Wright became known as the father of professional baseball. They played 60 games in the season of 1869, and they won all 60. The game looked a little different than today. Pitches were delivered underhand at this point, and runs were aplenty. In one game against another team from Cincinnati, the Red Stockings scored 103 runs. They continued their win streak through the first 24 games the next season. And then here's the thing. After the 1870 season, the team reverted back to being an amateur team. So the idea that everything leading to Major League Baseball grew out of this team is partly myth. It did inspire other clubs to go full-on professional. And is there a through line between what happened on this day in 1869 to today? Yes, but it wasn't the true beginning that many talk about with this team. And for that, we have to look at the National Association. It was a league that was a strong proponent of keeping the amateur element and tried to put the kibosh on paying players. In March 1871, the professional contingent walked out of the spring meetings being held due to the National Association wanting to remove salaries completely from the game. The professionals stormed out and decided to start their own league, and from that point, the rules, the changes in play would be inspired by the professional movement, heading down the path towards what we now know as Major League Baseball. Also on this day in 1892, another beginning for a Reds team, though in a different sport and a completely different country. John Houlding was ejected from the Everton Football Club after several weeks of simmering tensions. He was the owner of the soccer ground known as Anfield with no team to play there. So he decided to create a new team to play at Anfield, and that team would eventually become Liverpool FC in June, with Houlding as the club founder, and the germination of that club got its start on this day 133 years ago. Time now for today's Nothing to Do with Sports Fun Fact. French toast was not invented in France.
What did you say?
Instead, it can be traced to 4th century Rome. Now, the reason we refer to French toast as French toast is also the reason we refer to French fries as French fries. They were popularized in the U.S. by French immigrants. This has been an original Thrive Suite production.